G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to take you through 6 theraband related strength exercises to help bulletproof your shoulders. Now this is fantastic for anyone who just wants better shoulder function, whether you're a throwing athlete, a swimmer, whether you use your arms and shoulders every day for work. But these exercises will also have a place for most shoulder pain and most shoulder dysfunction. Obviously when doing these exercises, we need to use common sense as to how hard or how easy we make them. If you're in doubt, then obviously go see a physical therapist or a physiotherapist to make sure that you get the exercises dialed into exactly what you need for your specific shoulder pain. But from a general perspective, these exercises can hold great benefits for anyone who wants their shoulders to function better or feel better. Now, before we get to the video, obviously, if you do go on to enjoy the video, if you find these exercises helpful and useful, let us know in the comments down below. Please consider leaving a like on the video and also subscribe to the channel if you are new. Now, YouTube has also rolled out a new function called a super thanks. If you find that this video particularly is genuinely helpful for you, please consider leaving a super thanks donation down below. It just helps support the channel, allows us to do what we're doing, and allows us to keep getting this information out as best as possible. So with that being said, let's get into the exercises. So the first thing we basically need to talk about is when you're using a theraband, you want to choose a band that is appropriate for you. So in this instance, I've got a black theraband. You can use therotubing. You can use any resistance you find gives you good fatigue without losing technique. And we want to fatigue your muscles at about 8 to 12 reps, depending on what you're trying to do. But we need to make sure that the resistance is appropriate enough so that your technique holds together throughout the whole thing. So as I always tend to say, if you find that you get to 8 to 12 reps with good technique and you've got a lot of gas left in the tank, then you might find that the resistance is a little bit too easy. On the flip side, if you can only get to 5 or 6 reps before your technique starts to wobble a little bit, then clearly the resistance is a little bit too high. So try and find that balance or that sweet spot as best as you feel comfortable when doing each of these exercises. And it may change for each exercise depending on how strong those muscle groups are or how well your shoulder is functioning, depending on pain and things like that. But we want to aim for no pain, we want to aim for good technique and fatigue at about 8 to 12 reps. So the first exercise that we're going to do is a rotator cuff exercise. We're going to do some external rotation. Now, with every exercise that we do in this video, the common theme that I want you to think about is every exercise needs to be performed from a good posture, which means we need to be up nice and tall. Those shoulders need to be back to the best of your ability. We don't want you to round out or drop those shoulders and dump into a bad shape. Obviously, that's going to change the way you load your shoulder tissue, and it's going to potentially make it feel sore, or at least you're not necessarily going to get the right muscles doing the right things at the right time, which is really important for these exercises to be successful. So with the rotational exercise we're going to do for the rotator cuff, we just need to make sure they're up nice and tall. Again, shoulders back. We're jamming your elbow into your side. We're having the resistance pulling sort of laterally towards my right hand. So I like to lock the other arm in as well. And we're going to basically get you to rotate out as far as you feel comfortable. The distance that you go is dependent on how much range of motion you have. So if you've got a little bit of a stiff shoulder and you can only do a smaller range of motion, that's completely fine. Just make sure that when you're doing this, that shoulder that you're rotating doesn't dump forward at all, because that'll take the work from this exercise away from the rotator cuff at the side or the back of the shoulder and potentially bias the bicep tendon or some of the tissue at the front of the shoulder. So make sure that shoulder's back, make sure that the elbow stays in at your side at all times, and we're just rotating around that elbow. So we're not letting our elbow leave our side. We're jamming it in with our shoulder back. We're trying to rotate around that elbow. Now, if you're doing this and you can't stop the front of that shoulder from feeling sore, what you can do basically is from the same posture, instead of having your elbow directly at your side rotating outwards, if you shift your elbow forward slightly in front of the line of, I guess, the plane of your sort of shoulder to elbow, so instead of being sort of in line, if you have that elbow a little bit further forwards, and then sort of rotate around that angle, you should find that the tension moves away from the front of your shoulder more towards the side or the back, which is what we want for this exercise. So that exercise, again, is a staple of most rehab programs. That rotator cuff is very important for shoulder stability and good shoulder function. So make sure that you're in a great posture while you're rotating through that exercise. Now, exercise number 2, excuse me, is we're going to do what's called a diagonal. And essentially all we're doing is we're going to keep you in a good posture again. With your other hand, we're going to have that hand relatively down towards your side. And with your other arm out straight, we're going to basically get you to come up into a diagonal motion. Now what you should find with this is we want that thumb to be pointing backwards because we're creating some external rotation at the shoulder, which is a strong and stable shoulder position, and we're trying to go back in that plane. So a lot of people can often lead with their little finger or lead with the back of their hand, and it doesn't put your shoulder in as good of a position as you do if your thumb's pointing backwards. Now you obviously don't have to point your thumb backwards because it might detract from your ability to hold the band, but we're going to go in this diagonal motion, so not necessarily straight up and down or straight out to the side. We want to try and get you at about a 45-degree angle as best as you feel comfortable. Again, this helps address a lot of the musculature in the upper back, including your shoulder stabilizers. You'll get some rotator cuff strengthening as well from this by including that external rotation. Again, we need to make sure that you're up nice and tall, those shoulders stay back, and that you're not dumping forward, even on the other side as well, making sure that everything's staying relatively strong and relatively stable. So that's the diagonal. Now the third exercise is one of my favorite exercises, and it's a horizontal abduction or horizontal extension exercise. Now this exercise is really, really good to target those scapular stabilizers, the muscles that hold your shoulder blade in a good position on your back and support good shoulder movements as you're moving your arm up and down. So what we want to get you to do with this is, again, being up in a great posture once again, shoulders comfortably back. I like to have my patients with their arms out straight, around about the level of the belly button. But you can come up as high or as low depending on where you feel you need the most, or where you get the most benefit. So if you go up nice and tall, shoulders back, elbows straight, and bring the band up to about belly button level, again with your thumbs pointing sort of backwards and your palms facing up, creating that external rotation at the shoulders, we basically just want you to pull the band out in an arc. So we need to make sure that you have enough tension on the band with your elbows straight that you feel like you can squeeze those shoulder blades together as you're coming back. Now the other common issue that a lot of people do with this exercise is when we're coming back around that trunk, a lot of people can easily open up their chest as they're doing that. But what we want to make sure that we do is we need to maintain a stable trunk throughout. So keeping that rib cage down, and the only thing that's happening is those arms are coming out around the side and we're squeezing those shoulder blades together at the same time. So we're not allowing the chest to poke out. Excuse me, we're not allowing the chest to poke out at all. We need to make sure it's a stable platform for those shoulder blades to roll backwards and forwards across that upper back. So that's the horizontal sort of extension exercise. It's a fantastic one to do. Excuse me. Now the fourth exercise that we're going to go through is a rowing exercise. Now obviously with this band you can definitely attach it to something, you can wrap it around a post or a pole. What we're basically going to do with this exercise is that we can do this while you're sitting down. Again, if it's uncomfortable getting on the floor, feel free to obviously do this standing up. But what we want to do with the band is we're going to wrap the band around a surface that's not going to move. So in this case I'm going to use my feet. And again, we want to be up nice and tall. And what we're doing with this is we're pulling the band back towards us in a rowing motion. Now the common issue that a lot of people have with this exercise is that we tend to pull the band too far back, and what that tends to do is if you don't have the range of motion to do that effectively, it can be very easy to get to the point where your elbows are in line with your trunk and then the shoulder dumps forwards as we do that. Now if you have any biceps issues, any issues at the front of the shoulder, any impingements, any sort of anterior shoulder related dysfunction, we want to get you out of that dumping forward position as much as possible. So in order to, to counteract that specific issue, if you're up nice and tall, pulling your elbows to your trunk, I like to get people to stop level with your trunk. So you don't have to bring your hands to your belly. We just want you to stop once your elbows get to your trunk. That allows you to keep your shoulders back in a good position and gives you better access to squeezing those shoulder blades. Now, as you become better at this exercise, if you feel like you can maintain a good shoulder position and just extend those elbows, that's completely fine. But don't get stuck or trapped in a position where you're really worrying about where your hands are going and where you're finishing and you're letting your shoulders dump forwards. Make sure that those shoulders are back the whole time, and then to complete the movement, take the band as close to as you feel you can while you're maintaining that position. So that particular rowing exercise, again, is a great exercise to strengthen a lot of the muscles in the back, muscles that retract those shoulder blades, and also the muscles that extend your shoulders, which are important for normal function. Excuse me. All right, so the fifth exercise that we're going to go through here is a shrug exercise. And again, this exercise is a personal favorite of mine. It's a It's an exercise that doesn't necessarily address the rotator cuff, which is really important for any good shoulder function. It doesn't necessarily address those scapular stabilizers that support good normal function like a lot of the other exercises do, but it does address a lot of the upper trap dysfunction that we see. And the reason why this exercise has made the video is because when we see a lot of shoulder dysfunction occur, most people tend to drop and roll down into a bad position, whether that's using your computer, driving a car, sitting down watching TV, whatever it might be. And that dropping and rolling forwards creates an enormous amount of constant tension sort of pulling through your upper traps into your neck and into your shoulder. So over time, these muscles can get very tight and very restricted. And again, in turn, it can create a lot of neck dysfunction, upper back dysfunction, and shoulder dysfunction that a lot of people don't realize. So giving you a strengthening exercise for those upper traps is a great way to help support that position while you're trying to get into a better shape long term. So obviously with the band, it's best to do this standing, but just so that you guys can see, I'll do it kneeling, which might be a little bit awkward, but again, we can get the idea regardless. So what we want to do here is we want to make sure, again, that you're up nice and tall, shoulders are back. Now, when we're doing a shrug, particularly with a band, I like to have my hands a little bit off my hips. This allows me to sort of target those upper traps a little bit more than if my arms are basically straight at my side. Again, up nice and tall, shoulders back, and then all we're doing is lifting that up and down depending on how far you feel you can go. Now, the thing that a lot of people do wrong with the shrug, which I don't like, is a lot of people tend to shrug sort of forwards. You see that shoulder girdle translate forwards, and they're going basically up around their mouth when they're doing this. A perfect shrug ideally would be going up and down behind your ear. And again, you only need to go as high as you feel comfortable so that you feel you can maintain that good position. So with your hands out, up nice and tall, shoulders back, aiming to roll up and down behind the level of your ear, you'll get a really, really strong contraction, a really strong amount of effort through those upper traps. And then the other thing to mention with this is when you're doing those shrugs, you want to make sure that your neck stays in the same position. So a lot of people who value how high they go, what they basically tend to do, so as you can see this, is instead of going straight up and down, a lot of people try and go for more distance by poking their chin out at the same time. And again, it's disadvantageous, it's not what we want. You need to make sure that you're up nice and tall, shoulders back, hands out a little bit, and then traveling up and down as far as you feel you can while maintaining that good shape. So that's the fifth exercise. Excuse me. So the sixth exercise in the series, again, is another exercise that's more of a functional exercise. And we're going to go through a resisted push-up position. So I'll do a regular push-up, but feel free to do this on your knees if you feel like it's uncomfortable or if it's a little bit tricky. You can do it on an incline, so you can do it with your feet on the ground, your hands up on a bench or a seat. Choose the position that you feel is appropriate for you. Again, as I said, make sure that it's a position that respects that 8 to 12 rep range and you can maintain good technique without discomfort. Try and find that balance. If it works out that you can do this on the ground, that's fine. If you have to do it up on an incline, that's also fine as well. But essentially with this theraband push-up position, we're just doing a regular push-up. We're going to have the band wrapped around us to add a little bit more resistance. And it just makes for it asks to have more stability demands when you have a theraband around you as opposed to just doing a bench press or something like that. So again, before we get to the theraband, obviously from a push-up position, you need to make sure that you're straight. So we don't want you to dip your heels down, we don't want your bottom up. We want to make sure that you're in a straight line from your heels to the back of your head. We want your elbows sort of rotated so they're facing forwards, with your shoulder blades back. And from this position, we're going to do a push-up and you'll find that your elbows will track relatively close to your trunk. They're not going to be out like a lot of people tend to do. So what we want to do with this is, when we're using the theraband, I'm going to drape the theraband around the back of your shoulders, and I like to wrap it around my hands just to make sure that it stays there. Then I plant my hands on the ground, again, choosing a good position, up nice and tall, shoulders back, elbows facing forwards, and then when you find as you come up, those last little pushes, need a little bit more tension here. Those last few pushes, the last few degrees of that movement will essentially be a little bit more challenging than usual. Yeah, right. So again, good position, tummy drawn in, coming down and then coming up. Doing a regular push-up with a little bit of extra stability demands. coming from that theraband. So those 6 exercises are a great broad exercise group to do for any shoulder dysfunction, or even if you've got good shoulders, you just want better shoulders. So again, it's important to remember that the technique is vital. You've got to be in a good position. It's the same good position for every exercise. Shoulders back as best as possible, spine in a good position. We want to aim for that rep range that gives you some fatigue without losing that good technique. And then we also want to make sure that there's no discomfort. Excuse me. So if you find that any of those exercises challenge your shoulder pain in any way, take a step back, reduce the resistance, but then also take note of how well you're positioning that shoulder. Make sure it's not dumping forwards. Make sure that you're in as good a position as you feel you can, and then come back to the exercise. Ultimately, if there's for something like the push-ups, if your shoulder is too painful to do that, then put a pin in that, come back to that when you feel like the pain is a little bit more acceptable and you feel like you're sort of making some progress. But, excuse me, I'm puffing. So those exercises are great ones to do for any improved shoulder function, decrease the risk of shoulder pain. So if you went on to enjoy that, if you found those useful, please consider leaving a like down below. Consider using the super thanks button down below if you can as well. Subscribe to the channel. But with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.